What if I told you that Africa's new revolution isn't fought with guns, but with gold? Right now, a silent economic war is unfolding across the continent, one that could end decades of Western financial control. Leaked IMF documents have revealed something shocking: a digital currency plan designed not to help Africa, but to chain it. Yet one small nation, Burkina Faso, stood up and said no. That single act of defiance is now sending shockwaves from Washington to Paris. Documents leaked within global financial circles exposed the IMF's ambition to roll out a Phoenix dollar across Africa's Sahel region. The plan was simple, yet devastating. Countries drowning in debt would sign on first, pledging their gold reserves as collateral. If Burkina Faso accepted, nations like Mali, Niger, and even Nigeria would likely follow. It was more than just debt repayment, it was a blueprint for digital colonization. The Phoenix dollar would spread across Africa like an invisible chain, locking nations into a system of quiet control, where every transaction, every ounce of gold, would trace back to Western institutions. But then, a new generation of African leaders began to resist. This rejection didn't come out of nowhere. It came during a political wildfire burning across the Sahel. Call it what you want: economic sovereignty, resource nationalism, or simply freedom, but to the people living it, it feels like liberation. In Burkina Faso, 2025 became the turning point. The government nationalized 5 major gold mines, declaring that Africa's wealth would no longer belong to foreign shareholders. Overnight, Western corporations were told, "Your concessions are over. Your profits no longer belong to you." That gold, a fifth of the nation's GDP, was redirected to national development instead of corporate pockets. The message was clear: Africa's wealth belongs to Africa. And it wasn't just Burkina Faso. In Mali, gold contracts were reclaimed from multinational firms. In Niger, uranium, the very fuel powering France's nuclear plants, was finally being renegotiated. Across the Sahel, leaders were tearing up old contracts and writing new ones, not in French, not in English, but in the language of sovereignty. And this time, they weren't alone. From Ouagadougou to Niamey, a new doctrine began to form. Africa's natural resources are the backbone of independence. Military-led governments across the region started coordinating policies, linking defense, trade, and resource management. For the first time in generations, the people stood behind their leaders. In mining towns and border villages, crowds cheered as gold trucks no longer disappeared toward foreign ports. Western critics called it reckless nationalism. But to millions across the continent, it was just as long overdue. Because to them, foreign investment without sovereignty isn't investment, it's a trap. And the IMF? They saw their decades-long leverage begin to crumble. To understand why the IMF is panicking, you need to understand its playbook, a strategy used for over half a century. Step 1. Offer loans to struggling nations. Step 2. Attach impossible conditions. Step 3. Force austerity, privatization, and devaluation. It sounded technical, responsible, even. But in reality, it dismantled Africa's backbone. Hospitals closed. Schools collapsed. Public jobs vanished. Water, electricity, and airlines were sold off to foreign corporations, all under the IMF's reform programs. And when the people protested, their currencies were devalued, making imports unaffordable and dependence inevitable. It was control without soldiers, colonization through contracts. Then came Captain Ibrahim Traoré. When he stood before the IMF and called their proposal an economic coup, he didn't just reject a loan, he exposed the system itself. His defiance turned whispers into headlines and headlines into movements. Because once people see the mechanics of exploitation, it loses its legitimacy. Now, the question isn't whether the IMF's model is broken. It's what comes next. Across Africa, a new path is being built, one not drawn by Washington or Brussels, but by Africans themselves. Cap 1 Financial independence. Institutions like Afreximbank and the African Development Bank are replacing IMF dependency with regional lending built on local priorities, not collateralized gold. Key Cap 2 Intra-African Trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, is breaking the old cycle, where raw materials left Africa cheap and returned as overpriced imports. Now, African nations are trading with each other, keeping wealth within the continent. Key Cap 3 Monetary Autonomy. African economists are designing digital currencies backed by African reserves, ending dollar domination and creating a financial system rooted in sovereignty. Key Cap 4 Industrialization. Nationalizing resources is just step 1. The next phase is processing and production at home, refineries, factories, and innovation hubs that multiply value before exports ever leave the continent. Key Cap 5 Unity. Perhaps the most powerful weapon of all. From the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, leaders are speaking with one voice, and that collective defiance is rewriting history. What began as a fight over a $300 million gold deal has become something far greater. The death rattle of an old financial empire, and the birth of an African century. Because once the fire of sovereignty is lit, it doesn't flicker out. It spreads. So now the question is yours. Do you think Africa should ever trust the IMF again after this exposed economic coup? Or are we witnessing the dawn of a new world, one where Africa finally controls its destiny? If you want more stories that challenge the narrative about Black history, culture, and power, make sure you subscribe.